We'll make a start, everybody. So, welcome to this, having to think what the month is, November meeting of the Public Accountability Board. Slightly hesitated because, of course, we missed a month, didn't we, with the death of the Queen. And so we've got 2 months put into one here, which means that some of the reports are slightly dated as a consequence of that, but we'll do the best we can. So we move on in the agenda to the welcome and apologies. Shall we, for once, we've not done this for a while, just quickly go around the table and say who we are. So Alan Billings, Police and Crime Commissioner.
Fiona Topless, Communications and Engagement Manager for the OPCC.
Michael Lewis, Independent Ethics Panel.
Sharon Waldron, OPCC.
Steve Wright, Joint Independent Audit Committee Chair.
Laura Kostikiewicz, District Commander for Rotherham.
Mahmood, Detective Chief Inspection, PDP Performance and Governance.
Lindsay Butterfield, Temporary ACC with responsibility for local policing. Rowan Potley, Chief Constable.
Jackie Bland, Assistant Chief Officer for Resources.
Debbie Carrington, Chief Finance Officer for the Force.
Sally Parkin, Police Compliance Officer for the OPCC.
Michelle Buttery, Chief Exec and Solicitor for the OPCC.
Thank you very much. And we have Councillor Moyes, isn't it, from one of the authorities. I'm trying to think which one you're from.
Barnsley.
From Barnsley, and we welcome you. I'm sorry I've got my back to you. That's just how these things are. We have other people joining us on screen. I think we'll look in the bar and see who you are rather than go round in a remote fashion, everyone. So welcome. Have we apologies, Sally?
We've got Mr. Forber, we've got Mr. Alton.
Last minute abstraction
yeah.
for operational reasons, so this report is going to be presented by Lindsay and Deb today.
And then we've got Sophie Abbott as well.
Thank you very much. Item 3, announcements. Not aware of any. Unless Lauren, you have no public questions, no urgent items, and nothing to be considered in the absence of the press and the public. We are being filmed, just to remind you, and that will appear on the website in due course. Declarations of interest, item 7. Are there any that we need to know about? Item 8, minutes of the meeting held on the 14th of October, circulated. Are they a true and correct record? Does anybody want to quarrel with the minutes? Okay, let's take those as agreed. And we come to the matters arising, which is on page 17. There's just the one, and that was in the name of the DCC. Tim?
Well, so we followed this up with the Vogue lead for the Force of Violence Against Women and Girls lead for the Force, and Nat Shaw's confirmed back to me that we have really good age representation on the independent advisory group for Vogue, and particularly focusing on school-age children. So there's some really innovative work happening through Sheffield Wednesday Football Club, where we're looking at key messages and how the club can help us deliver that around peer-on-peer offending. They acknowledge that we're not as well represented when it comes to the older generations as we would like to be, and that's actually an agenda item on the next meeting's agenda, to look at which groups might represent that particular section of the community and how can we better engage with those.
There is something called Age UK, of course. Yes. So how many have you currently got who are over 60?
I don't have that level of detail with me, but I can find out.
I'd guess none, but I may stand to be corrected on that. But
I think we have a couple that are over 60, but probably none that are over 70.
Okay. They may not be willing to disclose either.
Yeah, and that's based on observations, so people may fall out with me now.
Okay, but anyway, you can have a look at that. So thank you very much for that. That was matters arising, item 9. So on to force performance, and we come to the paper 10, and that's the Rotherham District report, and we have the District Commander here, so thank you very much for that. Just a couple of things before I launch into it, and we'll do the usual thing. I'll ask you questions, not on everything, because it's a very detailed report, and thank you for that, but we'll pick out 1 or 2 things that have occurred to me. Just a general point about acronyms. I think I'm going to award a prize eventually to the report that manages to have the most acronyms in it that are unexplained, and we got 1 or 2 again today. Also today, I did have an email from one of the Rotherham councillors, and I passed that to you. I don't know whether you've seen that. Okay, well that is coming your way. So some of the things that we'll be talking about in this report, what she's suggesting is that it's not always quite like that on the ground, so I'd be grateful if you could have a look at that if we could
Absolutely.
get a reply for that. It's about a theft from a food bank, essentially, but they took some cash, and it's about the police response to that. So, okay, thank you. So looking at the Rotherham report then, if I can take you first of all to page 21. Item, this is number 3.1.4. It's about domestic abuse, and it's talking about joint working with partners. It mentions IDVAs. I just wonder, it may be a more general point, whether this, what's happening here, if you could just describe this, whether this is happening across the force, or if someone could comment on that.
No, so this is a specific operation that we're piloting in the Rotherham area with some funding we've obtained where we have a police officer and an IDVA going out to engage with some of our harder to reach DA victims. It's a fairly new pilot, we haven't got any analysis on it at this point in time, but it's a specific Rotherham initiative. Clearly there's IDVAs across the force, but this specific one is a Rotherham initiative.
Okay. So, Lindsay, you wanted to say something? Or?
No, I think just to support what Laura's already outlined there in terms of the pilot, we'll pilot in that particular locality. Clearly then we'll evaluate, and if it's successful, and I think early indications would suggest that there are some benefits from that approach, it's then how do we expand that across South Yorkshire.
How long is the pilot?
So it's been funded by the partnership, through the Rotherham Partnership, and we've been piloting it for 6 months to see how it goes. It's only just started due to some staffing challenges we had through the summer months. So it's only in its infancy. So although this report is a Q1 report, it actually started in Q2.
Right.
So for the next report, you should have an update around how that is going, and we can provide some context then.
Sure, thank you. So on to page 22, and this is at the top of my page here, which is 3.16. It talks about the decreasing trend of arrest rates for medium domestic abuse perpetrators. I just wonder if you have any views around that, and how you're addressing that.
Yeah, arrest and DA is really important for us, and we do have a positive action policy, which means it's not that we arrest everybody, because that's not appropriate, because we have to sit within legislation and look what's proportionate and reasonable at the time. But certainly it's a really good tool for us, particularly when we're looking at that safeguarding of our victims and engaging our victims, and reducing the risk and harms. And clearly, as you can see, we've still got a really high arrest rate around our high-risk offenders, which I would always expect to be particularly high because of the risks that are presented. There has been a decrease through Q1 for our medium risk. It's a slight decrease. It is in line with the force decrease. There is some administrative challenges within that, which we've rectified. But also there's an increase in reporting around our medium risk, which again proportionately lowered our arrest rate. We have, however, recognised that we need a renewed focus around that. So what we do now is we track all of our medium and high risk through our what's called our daily management meeting. So we have that first thing in the morning, we have that at 3 o'clock in the afternoon, and any high and medium risk DA suspect where there's been an assessment that an arrest is appropriate, they get tracked through that daily management meeting so that we can make sure there's activity against that. Now, we'd always expect that not to be a lower for medium risk, because actually quite regularly it's proportionate for us to not arrest medium risk, because we think about the breadth and scale of the domestic abuse definition that we deal with. For medium risk, it's quite often proportionate not to arrest, but where we have made that assessment, we do look at prioritising those through DMM process. But
it's a significant fall, isn't it, from 76 to 70%? But you don't think we should be concerned at this stage about that?
No, and 76 was particularly high.
Okay.
So it's against a particularly high rate from Q4. So 70% is still within in line with the force average. So it's not a significant reduction. We've also added in, since this point, we've added in the victim suspect location, past, present, future. What that does is we look at the risk around our suspect and our victims. That gets documented, and that's what drives our decision around arrests. So I can reassure you we have real focus on making sure that we're arresting those individuals promptly, and we're tracking those arrests through the daily management meetings structure.
Okay. And a little lower down on 3.1.8, this is again domestic abuse perpetrators, and just here, and I think somewhere else in the reports we've had about the number of breaches of DVPOs, and I just wonder whether you had any comment around that at all. I mean, it seems as if they're getting away with breaches. That's the anxiety.
I can tell you any breach is dealt with really robustly, and actually we're identifying breaches for DVPOs because we're really active in that space. So again, every perpetrator who has a DVPO or a DVPN allocated to them, again that is tracked through the morning our morning and afternoon DMMs. They have to, daily management meetings, that was not used 3-letter abbreviations, and we track that we're actively engaging with the victim and the perpetrator to ensure that there's no breaches, and that's a role of our neighbourhood team to do that, and we track that every day through a red, amber, green system, so we know that every perpetrator, every DVPN that's been issued has multiple contacts with the victim, with the perpetrator, to make sure those aren't being breached, and where a breach is identified, we are really robust with dealing with those breaches, so they will be dealt with appropriately if there's a breach, and we will look at arresting them and dealing with them.
Okay, thank you. I'm on to page 24 now, and this is 3.2.2, and it talks there about a steady increase in victims asking for information on their partner's history, and I wondered if you could tell us how that's been achieved, or has it just happened, or you
There's been so the DVDS scheme, or the Domestic Violence Disclosure Scheme, which is also known as Clare's Law, is a really important scheme. It's been around for quite a few years and has had quite a lot of publicity, and we spend quite a lot of time as a force and locally through our partnerships reinvested in the communication around the appropriateness of DVDS, how to access that information, when to access it. And what's really important is we've invested with our partners as well and with the voluntary sector, so that when people are engaging with our communities, they can highlight that that's available. So it's been an awful lot of targeted work from police and partners to continue to highlight the scheme, what it's there for, how to access it, and the importance. So we see this as a really good success factor.
So a general raising of awareness by all concerned, really?
Yeah, absolutely, by everybody across the partnership.
And then on to page 26. This is 3.5.5, the downward trend in vulnerable child referrals since this time last year. And I wonder whether you had any views on that, as to why that should be the case. And then a little lower down, you talk about adult referrals, and there's an increase there, and that just seemed to be a surprising way round in a sense, but could you say something around that?
Yeah, through the COVID lockdown, we actually saw an increase in our referrals when everybody was really hyper aware around, we were coming out of lockdown or towards the end of lockdown. We were really hyper aware about the impact of COVID and the impact of lockdowns. And nationally, there was a trend that saw this increase in child referrals. That also coincided with lots of child matters training, which was really positive. That we took place towards the end of this year. So nationally, there's been this drop on the back of COVID around child referrals, which is a forced trend as well. And it's just as that change in pattern as we engage with individuals. Now, we've got really robust process. You know, we've done the child matters training, so we've got everybody trained around neglect, spotting the signs. We don't sit on our laurels. The next thing is that we're reinvesting in that training around CCE and CSE and what does that look like. So there's a lot of training out there to keep that where it needs to be, and that focus on recognising the signs of child concerns. But as I say, it was a national and a local and a force-wide trend around coming out of lockdown, initial concerns that were raised on the back of that, which saw an escalation and this decrease as it comes back down again.
But given the amount of investment in the child matters training, wouldn't you have expected the numbers to go up, or at least not go down?
Not necessarily, because you've got to remember that child neglect is one very small part of what we look at from child concerns. So we did see, we do see that the steady numbers around that child neglect referrals as officers go in, and we saw a spike to start with, and then we had to recalibrate what that looked like, because we need to be really careful that we are dealing with people, with our partners in a really fair way, identifying needs and seeking that support from our partnerships. So whilst that Child Matters training went in, we're really content that we've reinforced that, we continue with those messages, but actually that's just a really small element of what our child referrals, concern referrals relate to.
Okay, thank you. I'm on page 27 now, 3.5.10, top of the page. This is what is working well. You talked there about cuckooing, and we had a report on this last time as well, I remember. I just wonder if you could say something around cuckooing, how big an issue you think that is, and again, what's working here, how well that's going, what's the reason for it working well, and
Cuckooing is something, again, I would say as a partnership, and I talk a lot about partnerships because it's really important to do so, because actually this is part of our partnership priorities as well around vulnerable adults and children. But cuckooing is a concern to us. It's when individuals target vulnerable adults and children and target their assets, their houses, target them for money, obtaining money, using their house to sell drugs, etc. It's a really challenging area, and it's something that we are particularly concerned about, which is why we prioritise that through partnership, which is why we have those systems and in place where we identify repeat vulnerable adults, because that can often be a sign of cuckooing. So we've got those processes and systems in place, whereas a partnership we can pick up those early signs and have that partnership conversation around sending them through to community MARAC, looking at partnership problem solving, so that we can intervene, as in this case, really early on, and make sure that vulnerable adult is protected. But we also spend a lot of time with our communication, again, talking about how to spot the signs of it, how to keep yourself safe, and that's really important. So it's something that we are really focused on from the vulnerable adult perspective, particularly around that sort of county lines and that cuckooing of locations for drugs.
how do you do that, communicating with the public around cuckooing?
So we do it again within partnerships. So we attend. I was only the other day at the Rotherham for Older People's forums, where we send messages out. We're part of the Safeguarding Awareness Week. We have it through various different mechanisms digitally, but also when we go out and we identify addresses of concerns or cuckooing, we will send leaflets out for this, because obviously not everyone communicates in the same way, so we will leaflet drop to raise awareness. We've got loads of different mechanisms that we will employ to try and target loads of different people in different ways.
And are there particular hotspots for cuckooing, or is it?
No, we don't see a particular hotspot. Cities generally, we see it generally across the area. Just tend to be targeted on those that are vulnerable.
Okay, thank you.
I'll just ask Laura in relation to our planning cycle. Marie, who heads up our partnerships commissioning team, will do her annual district commander consultation. If she hasn't come to you already, she will be, either you or a member of the team. I think anything that strikes you in terms of building into the commission services, from the referrals or some of the IDVA pilot work you've talked about, anything, if you could feed that in, it'll steer how we take the commission services forward in the future as well. So.
Absolutely.
Page 28, this is 3.6.9. You talked there about SYP developing a new child exploitation awareness campaign. I wonder if anyone could tell us a bit more about when that is, what form that's going to take.
Yeah, so we've got a new child exploitation campaign. It's looking at exploitation in its widest context as the first thing, because we need to recognise child exploitation is not just CSE, and there's been a real focus quite rightly on that in Rotherham for some time, but it's about recognising child exploitation in its widest context. We are working with our partners so that it will be echoed across the partnership. So from the police, we've got some, it's already out there from the police context, so we've already got some of our material out there. That's been echoed in the partnership from the R&B scene into our voluntary sector. So that's already started, and it's going to be really heightened at our Safeguarding Awareness Week, which is coming up, which we're using as a bit of a springboard to get quite a lot of this material out there. And it will also go into the training that we're doing into our communities and our frontline staff. So it's part and parcel of a wider piece of work that we're doing, but it's some of it is already out there now.
Okay. Presumably we're plugged into this, are we, Fiona? Okay, thank you.
It's probably just worth commenting that some survivors of CSE from Rotherham have been heavily involved in the concepts around the campaign and are really supportive of the way in which it's been framed. So if you haven't already seen it, I'll make sure that we get you a run through of some of the materials.
Yeah, no, that'd be good, thank you. Page 29, Laura, if we can. 3.7.3, similar thing. This is Operation Make Safe, and it talks there about a new national training and support package around Operation Make Safe, created by the College of Policing. I think South Yorkshire Police made I think it says it here, isn't it? Made a contribution in the development of that, which is very good. I just wonder whether we're doing anything around the unregulated sector. I mean, Airbnbs, that sort of, do we do anything with, I don't know how you do it, but is it something to talk about?
Yeah, it's something that we actually talk about when we, I was about to use another acronym, I'm sorry, in a child exploitation delivery group. It's one of the areas that we have been talking about and we are concerned about. I'm trying to phrase it in the right way, I suppose. It's difficult because they are unregulated. So that what we try and do is we try and get information out there. If we identify a particular landlord who is not complying with what they should be doing to keep people safe, like we did with Operation Grow, we will look at how we can target specific landlords to make sure that they employ what they should be doing around public safety. But from that Operation Make Safe perspective, it's much harder because because that is just individuals. So this is for us much more around that communication, of getting the communication out there and identifying those people that have got multiple properties. If we see someone with multiple properties who we're concerned about, it's then targeting those as individuals, because like I say, it's much less regulated and we haven't got corporations or companies we can target around that communication.
Have we got any reason to suppose this is an issue? I mean, a significant issue?
No, not at all. We don't see particular Airbnbs being used, and actually it still is hotels who and fast food establishments who are big areas, and taxis, and actually we get really good engagement from those three sectors. In fact, we're doing a bit of work coming up with those sectors, so we do get some really good engagement from those three sectors, and we do test purchase type activity to make sure that they are complying with what we want them to comply with, and we do get some really good engagement.
On to page 30, this is 3.8.4, and this may be a more general question rather than one, around detectives. Reading the different reports that we've had today, I can't completely get my head around whether this is how big an issue this is, and that there seems to be a shortage of detectives and people with investigative skills. That is clearly an anxiety and a worry. Is it something that's you're having to learn to live with, or can you see a light at the end of the tunnel? Yeah,
absolutely. We can definitely see a light at the end of the tunnel. We've got some really good plans in place through the workforce planning around what that looks like, and actually how we mitigate the risk in this interim period. So it's combined with the challenges that we've experienced, which is for the change in the PEQF, so the change in our recruitment process and our training process, which has created, as I've talked about in the report, some delays in staff landing, and then which has exacerbated an already existing problem, which is again a national challenge around detectives. But we have specific entry routes now around detectives, so we've got a detective police now. We look at our entry routes and specifically ask people to come onto the detective programmes. And what we're seeing, which is really positive, at the end of the PEQF, so the 2 routes in that we've currently have, or the 3 routes in, for those that are on the general route, we also ask them where they want to go, whether they want to become a detective or a response officer, because all of them get exposure across all 3 pillars, and actually we're getting a really good uptake from those new officers as they come out of the probation around where they want to go. So there's a lot of work ongoing to make sure that we people understand what it is to be a detective. We highlight the positives about being detectives. We give people the skills to get into that space. We've got the recruitment routes into that space, which is developing some real positive attitudes. It's going to take some time to see that filter through, as it has done for all of our recruits into policing, but there is definitely a light at the end of the tunnel and some real planning and progress and clarity over how we're going to get there and when we're going to get there and how we map those people becoming PIP 2 qualified, which is what we need for someone to be a detective. But there's also the piece of work that's ongoing to absolutely understand the makeup of each one of our investigation units, because whilst we have investigation units, they don't fully always investigate PIP 2, or PIP 2 is what we designate as a requiring a detective. A proportion of what they investigate doesn't require a detective, so there's a piece of work to make sure we have the right mix and we understand what that mix looks like, so that we can have that succession planning and make sure we target those higher risk roles first. So we'll always prioritise our detectives into our PVP units as an example, or into our CSE units or exploitation units, because actually that's a priority where we need to have people with the right training that need to be detectives there. So we will prioritise those first and then filter through into the other units second.
Yes, I met 20 at this station the other day on a detective now scheme. How long will it be before they're fully qualified?
The detective now cohort, it takes 2 years to become a qualified detective. I think, Laura's articulated the vast majority of the stuff that we're doing. As a force, we've recognised for some time that we've got a shortage in detectives. It mirrors really the national position around that. It's been raised by the Police Federation, particularly for a number of years, that there's a critical shortage around people with detective skills. We really have, through all of our recruitment pathways, maximised the opportunities to bring in detectives. So the Detective Now scheme, our own fast-track detective route, putting all of our new student officers into detective placements within the workforce, and really encouraging, when that happens, for them to be given some really interesting work to encourage them to want to go back to pursue a career in there. So we are making some really positive steps around that, but it will probably take us about another 18 to 24 months to get all the people necessary into detective roles, as a consequence of us sort of taking up our uplift numbers and having to give new people skills, training, experience, etc., to be able to be fully deployed into those roles.
Thank you very much. I'm on to page 32. And this is 4.1.3, talking about antisocial behaviour. I've had a number of councillors in not only Rotherham District, elsewhere as well, but Rotherham District particularly, I think, who talked about the difficulty of aligning the police neighbourhood teams with councillors' boundaries and the difficulties that's created for communication. I just wonder whether that's something that had come to your attention, or whether you're aware of that and what you were doing about it.
Absolutely. There's two challenges for us around boundaries. The first one is around our IT systems and making sure that our IT boundaries line up with the ward boundaries. It's a piece of work that's ongoing. It's in train, and that's that's around providing the right data for our councillors to understand what's happening in their area, and that is a piece of work that's ongoing and should be resolved in the new year. The second issue is around when there's changes of boundaries, is that our neighbourhood teams aren't fully aligned to our boundaries with our council areas, our town and parish council areas. That's a particular issue for one specific area, where that area has an area that fits in both central, south and north neighbourhoods. We have a piece of work ongoing. We've just recruited an additional officer who will go into the Maltby team, and when that person goes into the Maltby team, the whole of that area will then transition into the Maltby area, which means that they will have a coterminous team. So we are on with that, and we are aware of the challenge that's creating. In the meantime, I've got my chief inspector engaging to make sure that any issues identified can be picked up and we can deal with it. But it is absolutely an area we're aware of, and we're aware it's creating some challenges around that communication. We're trying to mitigate that whilst putting a plan in place to resolve it as soon as we can.
Okay, thank you. I had a meeting the other evening, well, two meetings last week with rural communities. I think you know about that probably. One at Thorpe Sullivan, and they felt very isolated there. They're close to the border with Nottinghamshire and Derbyshire. And they raised a specific issue, and it might be good for us to put this on the record today, but they were concerned about the bikers, the biking teams, and or team, and the fear that they might have gone, lost them forever, and they were saying this is really would not be good news for them because they value the biking team and they think they do a really good job in suppressing antisocial behaviour and crime in rural areas. I wonder if you could tell us about the biking team.
Our Orbit team are an incredibly successful neighbourhood policing sort of task force type resource, and we know that they are well used across the force area. We have taken the decision at the moment that they are going to default to work the Doncaster district predominantly due to some staffing challenges around Doncaster and increasing levels of demand that have been seen there. But the Orbit team have not been disbanded and they are still here to stay and will be deployed in other areas if needed.
So they are coming back. They will be relieved to hear that.
Yes.
So thank you very much. I'm on page 35 now. And there's a mention there in 5.1.3 of the ASB callback scheme. I wondered is that still going and how that's gone and whether you think that's been a success?
Absolutely, the ASB
call. Could you tell us what it is?
Yeah, absolutely. So if someone's a victim of antisocial behaviour, they'll receive a callback, so a phone call from one of the neighbourhood PCSOs, so we can get more information, update them with what's happening. So because as we know with antisocial behaviour, a lot of that is about a long-term plan rather than always that individual site. So it's around our PCSOs speaking around what they're going to do about dealing with antisocial behaviour, making sure we've got all the information and intelligence that we need so that can feed the picture around where we're going to put our resources. But also it's about identifying additional vulnerability that might have been missed so that we can put referrals through into the partnership around additional referrals or additional, not just around individuals, but maybe additional referrals for maybe our designing out crime officers to go out because we might identify a specific vulnerability geographically. So that's about us making sure that we are reassuring the public that we are listening to them, that we're getting all the information we need to tackle it, and that we're providing that support into those individuals, and that is still ongoing.
Has it increased victim satisfaction? Do you know?
I genuinely don't know, I'm afraid, in the fact that the callback scheme started before I landed, and so I can certainly take it away and have a look, but it's been operating longer than I've been here.
Just be interested to know, that's one would hope.
Yeah, absolutely, and I know we do see fairly high levels of satisfaction generally in ASB, but I will take that away and have a look at that.
I think that has been cited at Forster before, hasn't it?
As one of the drivers for increased satisfaction in Rotherham district compared to the others. But yeah, we can have a look at that.
And we know it did do that. So.
Yes.
Yeah. 36 seems some good working here. Top of the page, 5.1.7. Cannabis growing and the Tilly Awards. So someone deserves congratulations on that. Do you want to tell us about that?
Absolutely, we're really proud with what's happened with Operation Grow. So Operation Grow was a partnership operation. I have to really stress it. It was a really strong partnership operation where individuals from across the partnership came together in a specific team to tackle organised criminality that was driving cannabis cultivations within Rotherham, which led to increased violence. It led to significant power outages, and lots of antisocial behaviour. So this specific team looked at targeting those individuals. As you can see, we had 122 warrants executed with 20,000 cannabis plants recovered and over and 2.5 million worth of £2.5 million. But what's really important is led to lots of arrests. 120 prohibition notices, and that's the really important thing. So it's not just about going and executing the warrant, it's about then looking at dealing with those landlords, as I said before. So actually looking at closure orders, the prohibition orders. So we're targeting landlords that are knowingly allowing their properties to be used as cannabis factories to prevent them from doing it in the future, and dealing with antisocial behaviour at the same time. So it has been recognised as the Tilly Awards. It's been recognised by the Cutlers Guild as well, and they were one of the winners of the Rotherham District Commanders Awards. It's ongoing, so Operation Grow continues, although what we're in the next phase of now is mainstreaming that so we can learn across all of our teams, so those individuals will be placed back into core teams with a SPOC role, so we can pick that up across any of those teams. It's ongoing, but we're really proud of what we delivered through Operation Grow.
No, it's very good. The 20.5 million is really 2.5 then. There's a
It is
the
2.5 million.
decimal
I do, as I said, that's why I sort of stumbled over it. I was like, 20.5 million?
Sorry.
Yeah.
I knew we got inflation going,
But
I
do you know what? I'm
didn't
going to leave it on there. Can we have this as a public report?
Okay, so on to page 38, and again, something good, I think, Operation Duxford, that went well, and good successes there. This is 6.11.
Yeah, absolutely. Operation Duxford is a really good tool for us, and it's a force-wide initiative where we pull resources from across all 4 districts and specialist units into an area for a day, and we target and we go out and we are really visible, and we target those things that are impacting on our communities. And as you can see, we had some significant success in the October one. Now we have put this in, I know it's October, so it's not specifically within the quarter, but obviously it felt really important to highlight the Duxford. And as you can see, we had multiple arrests and drugs warrants with cannabis plants recovered, firearms seized, vehicles seized, identified stolen vehicles, cash seizures, significant engagement with our public. We had really good warrant where we identified £10,000 worth of illegal vapes which were seized. And actually, sometimes it's also just the visibility, because we're highly visible. Our neighbourhoods out there engaging with our communities in our schools, doing awareness in schools. So it's a really successful day for us, and we get lots of really positive feedback as a consequence of it.
Thank you. Just on the next page, 39, this is actually 6.1.5, but it's in the bullet points, and it's almost at the end of the bullets. It's talking about vapes, not something I know anything about, never having been a smoker either, but over £10,000 worth of illegal vapes. I can't even comprehend what an illegal vape is.
So vapes have to be are legislated. So there's only so many organisations that can sell a vape, and it has to be an official vape. So there's lots of vapes out there, which is obviously e-cigarettes, vapes that are not legal, or that are being sold illegally. And there's real risks around those, because they're being sold to our younger people predominantly, creating a risk. But actually, there's not the checks and balances to what's in those products. So that there were real danger. So this was a warrant which was executed where we identified these 10,000 vapes which weren't legal vapes, not legal to be sold, not regulated, and therefore they were seized.
Is the illegality the selling of them, or is it what's in them, or is it both?
It's both, and I can't tell you specifically within this one, but you have to be registered to sell them, and they have to be registered products. So there's the requirements around how they're made, by whom, so you have to be registered to be able to make and distribute them. And we do know there's a growing concern around vapes and some of the illegal vapes out there, and the dangerousness around them because of the unregulated nature of what's within the product itself.
Is that something we've done an awareness campaign about, vapes?
I don't think we have, no.
I mean, I'm just concerned about the number of school-aged children, for instance, I see now of vaping, and perhaps that's something we could have a think about.
Yeah, there's obviously a number of agencies that may be interested in that in terms of health messaging, trading standards. Probably one for our comms people to take away and have a look at.
Okay. Page.
That's true across the board. I chair a governing body of a school, and we have a progressive issue around these vapes. And they look like marker pens, don't they? So they're targeted directly at children.
And they're all fruity and smell quite sickly, don't they? And actually there's a growing concern that the children that are vaping are also smoking, so it's not stopping people smoking, it's actually children are doing both, which is a concern.
Because it's illegal to buy under 16. Is it under 18?
Under 18.
Yeah, but the children shouldn't have them in the first place, and if they're being provided illegally, that'll be part of the reason behind it.
Is the suggestion there that they're actually marketed for with children in mind. Then.
Absolutely.
So, okay. Right, something to look at. Page 40, crime. I didn't quite know what to make of paragraph 8.1.1, I think it was, yes. This is about what happened to crime after COVID, returning perhaps to normal levels, something like that, and our ability to deal with it. Are we back at pre-COVID levels?
Yeah, that's absolutely what it's trying to allude to. So that we've returned to those levels 3 years ago, pre-COVID, and that's what we're seeing, that return to what we would class as pre-normality, pre-COVID normality.
Okay. But we're still struggling with crime. Is this because we have staff vacancies? Is that the issue for us? Is it staff vacancies rather than crime going up?
Yeah, and we've got to remember that it's only a small proportion of what we deal with is crime. We deal with an awful lot out there of concern and public safety, mental health. So it's a small proportion of the incidents that we deal with. And that is coupled with the conversation I think we talked about last Public Accountability Board, and we've already alluded to around I've got a 12.2% vacancy factor within Rotherham at the minute due to the change in the training requirements for police officers, which again we have a plan to deal with, but that is the two things together, I would suggest.
I think there's also something around our accuracy in recording crime, and we all know there's quite a lot of bureaucracy in crime recording standards, and within one simple report there may be numerous crimes that actually need to be reported to accord with the standards which are set by the Home Office. And we know that we're really compliant, and obviously the more compliant you are, the more crimes you get, even though for a victim they may think that they're the victim of one crime, but actually the crime recording standards may say, well no, you've been victim of 4 actually. So we know that the crime recording standards not necessarily don't inflate the numbers of crime, but they do perhaps reflect something which is perhaps different to people's own perceptions. And I think the benchmark for that is the British Crime Survey, which shows crime quite static, whereas actually recorded crime is increasing nationally.
When did we last have a British crime survey?
Oh, I don't know.
I think the answer is not recently, isn't it?
There's been some coverage recently around nationally reported surveys. Crime feeling the same, reported crime in that way feeling the same, but actually recorded crime in accordance with the Home Office recording standards actually increasing.
I mean, I take the point you're making about what is a single incident for the victim may actually, if you're recording accurately, it's multiple crimes, and therefore you can get an inflated idea of what the crime situation is, if you like. But, Okay, I'm on page 41 now, and this is 8.1.6. You talked there, Laura, about Rotherham have invested in the neighbourhood crime team, and I'm not sure we've heard about that before. Could you say what that is, and again whether is that replicated across districts, or is that just Rotherham?
Absolutely, it's the neighbourhood crime team. You might have heard of it previously called the Serious Acquisitive Crime Team. Nationally, SAC has now changed to neighbourhood crime. So it's dealing with serious acquisitive crimes of burglaries and theft of motor vehicles, theft from motor vehicles, that type of offences. But what we recognise is that that there's a challenge around us dealing with those, and actually it's a very specific nature of offending. We know, for example, most burglaries are committed by a small number of individuals, and it's very much about targeting individuals. To deal with burglaries and theft of motor vehicles specifically. So the neighbourhood crime team we've reviewed actually the makeup and the profile of what that team needs to look like, with the skill set and the terms of reference around that team. So they're focusing on being much more proactive, engaging, working with the IOM, so our Integrated Offender Management team, who work with our prolific offenders to look at how we can target those individuals that are causing that harm within our communities, because we know it does cause a lot of harm and anxiety, burglaries and robberies and vehicle crime. So that's the makeup of the neighbourhood crime team. There's much more investment in that area, and really importantly also linking into the neighbourhood policing teams. So it's really important that it's a four-pronged approach for us. So it's our investigators, our neighbourhood crime team, that have a tasking capability linked into that so they can go out and make arrests or do some work, some covert type work in areas where we might want to, where we've got spikes, linking into the intelligence team so we've got a really good accurate picture around what's happening, so again we can target resources, working with neighbourhood teams who have POPs plans, so problem orientated policing plans in place for any areas where we see spikes, and they're very much part of that model. And then finally the integrated defender management team who work with people who have been identified as being previous prolific offenders to prevent them from committing further crime. So for us it's that multi-pronged approach to tackling neighbourhood crime.
Thanks. Page 25, 9.12, this is under the heading Treating People Fairly. Responding to calls for service, and in that paragraph at the end there you say this also comes at a time where we are subtly changing the focus away from target times towards delivering a quality response and a quality investigation. I just wonder if you could unpick that a little bit for us. Does that mean, well, what does it mean?
So what that very much means, when I landed in May, there was a real drive, quite rightly.
Sounds as if you came from the planet Zog or something.
No, I didn't, but I came from another force and another role, and I was very much involved in PvP, but definitely from Earth. But there was a very much a drive around, quite rightly, it's about timeliness of our responses, it's about getting there quickly so that we can look after our communities, we are more able to get evidence if we get there quickly. But that was the mantra was about attending quickly to the detriment of other things. So our neighbourhood crime teams quite often were abstracted into our responding quickly so we could hit those target times. And actually when we got there, we weren't necessarily always doing the best job when we got there, because actually it was about getting to the next job, because it was about hitting the response times. So what we're subtly trying to say is response times are really important, because actually we're more likely to deal effectively if we get there quickly. We're more likely to engage with members of the public because they're going to be more satisfied. We're more likely to gather the evidence quickly. But actually it's just as important to do the right thing when we're there, and to do it thoroughly and do a quality job when we're there, and give our public, our communities, the time that they need when we arrive. And it's just as important to recognise that there are wider risks outside the response of responding quickly to jobs. So domestic abuse arrests, for example, it's really important that we continue to prioritise our domestic abuse, or a high risk missing from home, or a missing person. It's really important that we continue to allow our neighbourhoods the time to do our problem orientated policing. So it's about recognising that there are multiple priorities and risks, and making sure we spin those plates to make sure we deal with them all, but do it in the right way, focusing on the end point, which is servicing our communities rather than servicing a response time. So it's about changing the mantra for our officers around away from outputs towards doing the right thing and doing it right first time.
Do you think there are going to be consequences of this subtle switch?
Yeah, there is always consequences to change, isn't there? Because actually it takes people time to change, but what we have in place is really good checks and balances in place through our daily management meetings. We recognise we've had a few quite significant incidents in Rotherham which created some real challenges around our response. So there are some, if you look in the next quarter, you will see a dip in our response times. What you will see is that dip is now, we are now moving back up to where we would expect to be. We came out of some significant demand over the summer period, over the sacked Queen's death, over a couple of significant incidents, plus that changing of the culture that we're trying to embed. And as we're coming out of that, what you can see is actually they're going back up again. What I would say is even with the dip that we saw, we are still in line with the response time seen from the rest of the force. So we've never dipped below the response times for the other districts. We are just now more in line with those response times for other districts.
Okay, yeah. Yeah, it just needs careful explanation to the public, that's all, doesn't it? Because they want both. They want timeliness and quality when you get there. So.
And that's absolutely what we want. The challenge that we have predominantly at the moment is the new officers that are coming through. Everybody knows we are increasing our number of police officers, but they are not all landing at once, fully trained, ready to go. So those new officers are coming through the ranks now, fully operationally competent, about 50 of them a month being distributed across the force, and they are predominantly filling some of those seats in response teams, which are being gradually uplifted over time. So we will, through that process, get to more jobs more quickly, but importantly, when we get there, we'll do a quality job, because actually if we don't do that, it just means somebody has to go back and do it again, which actually then contributes to a bit of a vicious cycle in terms of wasted demand.
Yeah, sure, thank you. The last thing you'll be glad to know is really just some congratulations. I think this is page 20, no, it's 45, 27 in the report. 10.1.4, pleased to report that DCI Anila Khalil-Khan has been successful in her bid for the Fulbright Stephen Lawrence Award. It sounds very prestigious, and she seems to have done very well.
Absolutely. Yeah, she's off to America to do some research and to bring some learning back for us. Really tough competition for her, but absolutely really pleased for her, and I think it'll be really good for her, but really good for us as well.
Well, we'll note it here as well, and congratulations, as I say, to her. I think that's all I wanted to say. We've spent quite a bit of time on that today, Laura. It won't always be like this.
Okay.
But, was there anything that you wanted to pick up on that we haven't touched on that you feel a burning desire to talk about? Or?
No, not at all. I suppose just to reiterate that final point around actually the change of culture that we are trying to drive within Rotherham around doing the right thing, around focusing on quality is really important to us, and that's around focusing on welfare for our officers through this really tough period. And I raise it because we're here talking about Q1. Actually, we're at the end of Q2 into Q3 now. And so I'm raising it because we've talked about the changes we're seeing, the challenges we have around resourcing levels. But actually what we're seeing is a real positive outcome as a consequence of those changes in culture. Now we're seeing people making the right decisions at the right time. We're starting to see that translated into positive outcomes for our communities, which is where we wanted to go. But it is part of a journey, and we will continue on that journey for a few months yet.
Good, lovely. Well, thank you very much for the Rotherham District report, and perhaps you could have a look at that email from Councillor Hoddinott.
I will have a look.
Who always gives me a hard time, so it would be good to have a response.
No worries.
Thank you very much indeed.
Thank you.
Thanks. So moving on forced performance to item 11 on the agenda then, which is forced performance against the police and crime plan. We've got two reports. The first is about protecting vulnerable people, and ACC Rick Alton was due to do that, but he's not here, and Debbie, the lot has fallen on you. So.
It certainly has been.
Okay, well, we'll do the same again. We'll not go through page by page, but I'll just pick out one or two things and ask you to comment on them, and then if there's anything at the end that you want to draw our attention to, please do. So page 49, we'll start there, which is 3.1.2, the Safe Spaces Survey. I wondered, with that survey, whether you had any plan to involve the students at all, since this is an area of violence against women and girls where they're of particular concern.
Indeed, and speaking for Nat, so apologies, but having had a conversation with her about this, because she's the one that will be instigating this. She spent quite a lot of time on this, consulting with the Vorg IAG and also with the universities, just so that we can sort of, she can be reassured that the sort of questions that are going to be involved in that and the participants are people that we're actually wanting to be able to get the information from. So she is intending, obviously the survey is open to anybody, but we're hoping that with the work that she's done we'll be able to quite, sort of capture the sort of scale of age ranges, for example, or and diverse groups that we potentially might not have been able to reach out to had she not done the work.
Sure. And would you involve the VRU in this, some of whom are on screen? Because it's an area where, through Safer Streets funding, they've obviously had a as well.
Yeah.
Well, if you could make a note too.
Yeah, I certainly will. I'll make sure that Nat's aware of that.
Thanks very much. On page 50, 3.25, this is, we're into domestic abuse now and sexual offences. It talks about underreporting, which we know is always an issue. I just wonder whether you had any views around, how we can get better reporting of that.
Yeah, I think it's really just, as Mum said previous to me, is around, it's about getting out there and doing, promoting, in various areas, looking at where hotspots are, you know, campaigns leading up to things like, you know, we've got obviously festive period coming up, we've got World Cup, you know, all the nighttime economy stuff when we expect that we will potentially see increases. It's just about doing what we can to get out there and promote our key messages and just really sort of promote reporting.
Well, on the next page, on 3.27, talks about frequent publicity campaigns to encourage reporting there. I wonder how we compared with other. Do we know what other forces do? How do we compare?
In terms of the campaigns that we do,
yes.
I think particularly because of the Vogue agenda as well, and certainly the work that Nat has progressed through that around No More and going into phase 2 of that, which is obviously all linked through the domestic abuse and the stalking and harassment and serious sexual offending, etc. I think we have got that. We've had for a long time now that consistency in terms of approach of what's going out there. I have to say I don't know how that compares to other forces, but I'd sort of suggest that we're in a pretty strong position. Unless
we certainly know that with our Vogue campaign we have attracted the interest of numerous other forces who are interested in adopting its kind of style and tone, and I think that our sort of DA campaigning is pretty robust. I think it compares well against other forces that are out there.
Okay.
I think we'd quite like to look at the impact of criminal justice outcomes and things like the COVID backlogs in courts on victims' willingness to come forward and report, and the perceptions among victims that, well, what's the point then? So I think we'd like to do some work. I know Sharon, in terms of the scoping exercise for violence against women and girls, has got some findings that we're going to discuss at a partner listening event. But I think it would be good to track through that.
I think some of that may reflect more, not necessarily a reluctance to report, but maybe an attrition rate within the CJ process and people withdrawing cooperation as the timeliness of the CJ process extends. Would be my kind of gut instinct take on it.
And what about in the next sentence on that 3.27? It talks about honour-based abuse and forced marriages. Is that an area where we do particularly well, or is that something where we?
Yeah, we are doing particularly well, and it's one of my staff in PVP performance and governance who is the thematic force lead for that area. She invests a significant amount of time within training, raising awareness. You know, we've got a lot of that we've done, for example, a mandatory training programme recently with Carmen Nirvana, which is a well-known company who are obviously very well involved within this area, and it's about a lot of partnership working. It's about spotting the signs and acting, you know, with a partnership approach, but really getting key messages out to our staff as well as to the signs to look out for. So we are in a particularly strong position as well in terms of that area.
Okay, just a little lower down on that page, 3.30. This is domestic abuse. It talks about a scheme piloted by the Kent Police where a victim can choose to speak to an officer over the phone via a video conference, and the claim is that that's been successful, but I just wonder whether you had any views around that, particularly whether, I mean, how you would know that, for instance, a perpetrator wasn't in the house when this was going on. It didn't strike me as being as robust as it seemed. But
to be quite honest, Sarah, I'd need to go back to Mr. Cowley on this, because I think he's the one that's leading on this piece of work. But I fully understand, you know, how would you know a perpetrator was there other than what you've been told? If clearly, as it's saying, satisfactory rates and improved outcomes for investigations, if that, and I guess it goes probably a little bit away back to the conversation that we just had about having time to do things. Because if you're speaking one-to-one with somebody, and even if that's on a conference call, if that individual feels that you're giving them the time and you're investing that time without radios going off and other jobs taking precedence, it could well be that that has an impact. And we did some recent trauma-informed training to a number of response officers in relation to how to look out for the signs of rape and serious sexual offending. And what came out of that quite interestingly is, obviously, before I embarked on the bit of training that I did, It was about speaking to survivors and getting the survivor voice. And the most important thing they say is, it's that very first impression. And regardless of whether you're a response officer or you're coming from a different specialist team, that's where they start to build up, obviously, you know, and that first impression, if you've got somebody, I guess, either physically in a room with you or looking at a screen talking to you, if you feel that that first impression is actually this person believes me, then maybe, you know, there's some, it could well be that there is an increased satisfaction. I think there'd probably be some more work to be done on that, if I'm quite honest, is what I'm getting to, and it might be worth I go back and speak to Mr. Cowley about it.
Well, it seemed as well that you're going to try it for 2 weeks. That seemed to be no time at all, really. Hardly worth doing, but anyway. But the golden minute, or whatever you're going to call it, I think you're absolutely right about that. Okay. On to page 53, yes. 3.44. Victim Support Services now have 2 dedicated stalking advocates. I wonder whether anything was being done there around stalking online, cyber profiling.
Potentially. I will check on that, to be honest. This is Ma'am Buttle's area of responsibility. But I will certainly go back to her and ask her in terms of what we're doing online.
Yeah, be interesting.
I do feel that we will be doing, as a RASO force lead, I'm certainly doing something around sexual abuse online reporting, and I think that we're running in parallel in terms of things we're doing.
Yeah, okay.
But I can ask certainly.
Yeah, it's clearly potentially a growing area, isn't it?
Yeah, indeed.
Okay. Then on to page 54. This is 3.53. I think it's just to make the point that there are other organisations at work here. The Amber group in Doncaster, who work with male and female, potential male and female sex workers and those who are being sexually exploited. And there's a reference somewhere in there. I'm just trying to find. Oh yes, in Parath it is 3.53 SWOP swap. I think is SWWOP. Sharon, do you know?
Yes, it is. It's 2 W's. Sheffield Working Women's
Opportunities somewhere in there, or
project.
something like that. Yeah. Okay.
Yeah, thank you.
I don't think I've got anything else. Just to spare you, Debbie. But if there's anything in there that you wanted to draw to my attention.
Not particularly, other than probably just to comment upon the work that we've done within our management of sex offenders, particularly within our advisor arena over the past few months, has been extremely significant in putting us in a very strong position. We've recently had, obviously, HMIC inspection within that area. They've been out and had a look at the work we've been doing over the past few months. We've got a very robust escalation process in place with probation. We've got a standard operating procedure and dashboards, and we're managing it from the centre. There's a huge amount now of governance around how we manage our sex offenders, so it's really just to give that reassurance that is all taking place. And I haven't really got anything else there unless anybody else.
Okay, no, that's fine. Thank you very much. Thank you for that report. Our next report is item 12, Force Performance Against the Police and Crime Plan. This again was in the name of Rick. Presumably this is not you. This is...
No.
Right,
No, this is me.
thank you very much, Deborah. And yes, you say you're very welcome to go or to stay, but I see you've chosen to go.
I'll go. Thank you.
Thank you. So if we turn to item 12, then the tackling crime and antisocial behaviour is the area of the police and crime plan that's being looked at here. So, Lindsay, this is you then. So if I take you straight the way to page 60 and 3.4. Oh, that was really just, I think we may already have dealt with this, about detectives and the slightly mixed messages we were getting as we read the reports through, but I think we've probably dealt with that, unless there's anything more you wanted to say about that.
I don't think so, Commissioner. I think Laura has covered that fairly comprehensively.
Okay, well, let's go to 61 then, and that's 3.14. Interactive voice response. Could you tell us Could you explain that to us? Explain through me to the great public who are listening to all this,
Absolutely.
what it is that they're
Absolutely.
getting.
So interactive voice.
This has already started.
It has. So interactive voice response is a piece of technology, and it's an automated telephone system. So it gives callers the opportunity via a menu. So press 1 for press 2 for custody, press 3 to speak to the operator, for example. So that's the piece of technology that we're currently trialling in the hope that that will help to direct callers to the right place. So for example, I might be a solicitor wanting to speak to a custody suite. I don't need to stay on hold to be answered in the control room to then be transferred. Actually, this piece of equipment gives the opportunity to press the appropriate number for custody and be diverted straight to where I need to be. So it's hopeful that that will reduce some of that demand and the inappropriate or unnecessary calls that are going through to our control room.
Have we got any sense of how it's going?
The early indications are good, but I think it's too early to say that there's any tangible evaluation of that. But I know I had the quarterly performance review meeting with the control room last week, and it's something that they are monitoring very closely.
Okay, thank you. On to page 62, 3.17, and that's talking about the force control room and particularly dispatching officers and the recruitment there and staffing there. Again, could you say something around that to allay any anxieties it may create?
Yeah, absolutely. So the team in the control room prior to my arrival have worked tirelessly to improve their recruitment and the retention of their staff, and we are in a really positive place in relation to that. I've been working really closely with the management team in there, across with Jackie and colleagues in finance and people's services, HR, to make sure we've got a really solid recruitment plan for the next 12 to 24 months for the control room, because we know that if we do lose staff, it takes us time to recruit and to train to the relevant standard. So actually we're looking to sign off a significant intake of staff for January, this coming January, which means those staff will be fully up to speed and deployable in order for the summer surge that will undoubtedly follow next summer. So some really sound and solid recruitment plans for 2023 to continue that trend that we're...
And I must say morale in the force control room seems pretty good. I was at the awards recently and they all seem very pleased with. It's been a period of some disruption and disturbance, the refurbishment and all the rest, but they seem to be in good part, good place.
Absolutely. I think the improved staffing picture and the refurbishment of Atlas Court is really playing into that. And I think you're right, Commissioner. I think that they are in good spirits.
Good. We're all touching wood. Page 66, jumping pretty rapidly through this, Lindsay. Retail crime. I think I mentioned to the senior command team that I've had these meetings recently with retailers in Barnsley and Doncaster, and with a guy who's in charge of security for a major chain stores which are present in Doncaster and Sheffield, and he was concerned about the amount of shoplifting that was going on in his stores there. So I just wondered how proactive we are around particularly small businesses, the small retailers, whether we are reaching out to them and doing stuff around that, because I think the general feeling is that this is a growing trend now with cost of living crisis and everything else.
And I think we're probably still to see the full impact of some of those factors. But just for reassurance then, from a governance perspective, we have a strategic lead for retail crime, which is Chief Superintendent Ian Prophet. He's supported by a thematic lead, which is Chief Inspector Dave Struggles, and their responsibility is to really drive out those key messages to the respective
Dave
districts.
Struggles is the thematic lead.
And he's
been to the Doncaster.
Yes,
trial.
yeah, absolutely. So from the follow-up in relation to that particular incident, I'm reassured that we have got those relationships in place and that we are taking the appropriate measures where incidents are reported to us. I think your point around some of the smaller retailers is an area that we need to focus on, but I'm satisfied that where we've got the chain stores, for example, we've got really good relationships and we're working really closely with them in relation to the incidents that they're reporting. And I guess that overlays our problem solving approaches, whereby if we get repeated incidents from a locality, and the expectation on the neighbourhood team is that they would focus on that and put into place that problem solving plan. jointly with partners where that's appropriate as well to tackle that problem.
Yeah, they'd had the docos designing out crime officers at their store who had been very helpful, and they've been able to do some. I mean, for the bigger stores, they clearly got resources, they can do that sort of thing, but the little stores, it's a different kettle of fish. And so, yeah.
It is, and I think where we've got some of the smaller retailers that are experiencing those problems, I'd encourage them to approach the neighbourhood policing teams, and we can link into appropriate resources to support them.
Okay, we'll pass that message on. Page 73, we're jumping fairly rapidly here. This is offender management 3.106. The force recognises that the management of offenders is a key part of achieving the police crime plan. The integrated offender management teams work towards the South Yorkshire Police integrated offender management strategy and are fully engaged in implementing the national IOM strategy, etc. I just wonder whether perhaps in some future report we could have something about how this is being managed, what exactly the outcomes are, whether you're happy with it, and how
Absolutely.
it's going.
I think that's a general comment, Chief, really, just in terms of the reports are full of lots of activity that's going on in certain areas, but it's what's been achieved. It's a so what, I think, if we could. I mean, like the example around the medium risk that Laura gave, where clearly effective risk management was going on and they were addressing, and where there is any gap, it's plugged, but it's just the report is sort of left hanging really in terms of the issue. So.
Okay, on page 75, 3.117, good grief, a bail. And I wonder if you could say something about, well, perhaps again this is something for a future report around how this is managed, defendants, suspects, in terms of bail. So,
Apologies, Commissioner, I think I might have a different version to
Oh.
yourself.
I think I've got a different
well, I'm on, this is page 75, 3.117.
Ours relates to information sharing agreements.
Oh, right. It's the very last paragraph, very last item, before you get to exception reporting.
I'm quickly skim reading these whole 2 pages that can't see bail on
No,
there.
I can't.
Right.
Ours
Okay.
is about information sharing agreement.
This is a mystery.
I think we've got 2 references to page 75, 3117, so we'll take that away and feed in a question, shall we, Commissioner?
It's there. So it's definitely printed on mine.
Shall I take your question, Commissioner?
We'll take your paper.
Well, we'll find you it and send it to you, and then for a future report. I think that's all I wanted to say. I don't know whether there's anything else.
No, I just think, Commissioner, just to pick up on the some of the initial paragraphs in there in relation to control room performance and the significant improvements we've seen around call handling. You know, our 999 call handling average wait time for last month was 9 seconds, which is a fantastic improvement from
9
where
seconds,
we've been.
yes.
And we know 101 isn't quite where we need it to be yet, but I'm confident with the recruitment plans we've got in place, we will soon start to see improvements in that as well.
Great. Lovely. Thank you very much. I'm sorry we galloped a bit, but that was partly because Rotherham had a lot in their report and I wanted to do justice to that. So that was item 12. Item 13, SYP's quarterly budget monitoring overview. Debbie, this is yourself. 77 to 86 in the pack, unless your pack is different from mine.
We'll see if our figures are the same. That'll be the interesting one.
Okay.
Just like me to say a little bit about
Yeah,
it,
just a little. Yeah.
So this is the Q2 end of September position, our projected outturn based on what we know and what we estimate at the end of September. So we're projecting a £1.8 million underspend, which is a 0.6% of the budget overall. I'm just going to compare that to June, where we were reporting a £4 million underspend, so we have seen that come down. But I know I've said this before, we are in very uncertain times, and predicting spend is quite challenging for us at the moment in the times that we're in, with the challenges that we face around contractual inflation and utilities alone. So that movement, that between that 4 million, that 1.8 million pound where we are at the end of September, there are two areas that have moved more significantly than others. One being police pay, and just to say a few words around that, when we predicted the underspending in June, we were predicting an underspend on police pay, and we were able to invest some of that money into a detective now cohort and fund some surge activity. What we are now seeing is that the police pay is fairly balanced, but we're seeing an overspending over time, which is understandable. There are a number of contributing factors to that. The impact of PQF is most definitely one of those contributing factors. As it takes longer for those new officers to reach that full operational competency. The other area of significant change is premises, which is not surprising, is it? Because we're all facing that individually as well as the force. But in this last month, we've seen a £1.4 million swing on utilities between August and September. So that has brought those underspends down. And as I said at the start, I think that volatility is a real challenge for us, and this is only at a point in time, and there's no doubt that the projections will change between now and the end of the year. Just a couple of things to know is we haven't adjusted for the 1.25% national insurance reduction because we wanted to make sure that was definitely going to happen.
And is that definitely going to, or are you waiting on the mini budget?
I believe we are processing that this month, so my understanding it is going to happen, but
I thought it came into place on the 1st of November. I thought it came into place on the 1st of November.
And that's why it is being addressed through through payroll this month.
I don't think it's one of the ones where there's an element of doubt still. I think the rest of it is, you're right, we're waiting for the official budget or whatever we're calling it that's going to come on the 17th.
Well, they rescinded the act that put it in place, didn't they?
Yeah.
Yeah, so the stuff they'd committed to, in a sense, hold.
Well, that's gone through Parliament already, which is why they're trying to stop it.
So that will see another swing in underspends, because that's going to give us around about 0.77 million. So that will increase the underspends slightly. However, next year and beyond, that's not expected to provide us with any underspends or any savings, because we do expect the funding to be reduced accordingly. So we won't have to pay it, but we won't get the funding for it either. The other area as well that we've not yet factored into projection, so this will take it the other way, is the reopened staff pay award. So that has now been agreed, that staff will get the same as police officers, and we need to work that through, and we need to see what that impact is, but that will be a cost pressure. So we might benefit from the NI reduction on the one hand, but then we'll have the additional cost of the staff pay award on the other hand. So they're just two areas that we've not yet done, but they will be fed through for the next report. So from a revenue point of view, I think they're the key points really. Are there any questions on that? And I can say a little bit about capital.
No, I've no questions myself. Steve, I don't know whether you had any.
No. It's a comment really. I can see that they're going to spend most of the time juggling. And using a Mystic Mac crystal ball to try and put.
Yeah, I'm buying those for all my stuff.
Yeah, I think the coming couple of months is going to be really fraught for us. But
I mean, budget setting is very difficult for us at the moment. In terms of savings, we are ahead of the target that we've been set for the current year, and that excess that we are predicting in here will count towards the £7 million target that you set at budget setting. And then just to say on capital that we are starting to see a little bit of slippage, which is not unusual for this time of year. But our approach to the programme of the past few years is that we do reduce the budget to mitigate against that. So it's not of concern. It's not expected to result in significant variances. I do think we are in a much stronger position on capital with the increased challenge and scrutiny that we've been carrying out, and the ongoing scrutiny through the Strategic Resourcing Board. And just to say on capital from a budget setting point of view, as we've gone through the strategic planning round, we do see next year as being a bit more of a sort of a pause. we're not looking to put any new capital activity in the programme unless there are some firm plans around delivery. So it gives us that time to catch up, so to almost catch up on some of this slippage and get back onto an even keel. And also we recognise that you know, we do need to scrutinise capital asks given the financial challenges that we face.
Yep. That's it.
It is?
Yes, I think that's fine. Thank you very much. Thank you. That was item 13, wasn't it? So Chief Executive reporting, item 14. Michelle, this is PCC's strategic planning timetable.
Yes, Commissioner, so a verbal report, we've produced a report on previous occasions in relation to the process and the strategic and financial planning timetable we're working to with the force colleagues. We've got another planning and efficiency group later this month. The OPCC is carrying out some due diligence in relation to the Chief Constable's assessment of need, including areas of growth and efficiency savings. So we're working well with force colleagues on understanding the picture there and the needs going forward, both next year and the medium term, which sort of ties in with what Debbie said about next year being an important year in terms of understanding priority-based budgeting and capital requirements going forward, so an important year. So the November Planning and Efficiency Group will see the starts of the budget build really in terms of assumptions, precept, that's the council tax precept that you propose, Commissioner, modelling in terms of what each uplift in council tax precept would give in terms of the Chief Constable's ask for maintaining and improving policing services for South Yorkshire going forward. On the other side of the coin, so that's the sort of financial side, on the strategic planning side and the priorities, you've indicated, Commissioner, that you intend to revise your police and crime plan to reflect the climate early next year, to go hand in hand with the budget and the precept proposal to the police and crime panel. So my team are looking at what that would look like. You've indicated that there will be no change to the overarching policing priorities. It will be the nuancing of the areas of focus to reflect the strategic intelligence assessment from the force and the external climate things that need to be recognised going forward, because it will be your last year in your term of office, so it will be signalling the way forward. So we're working hard in the background in relation to that at the moment.
Okay, thank you very much. Item 6.15, PCC decisions.
Well, the only one that I wanted to highlight really is the Proceeds of Crime Act. So seizures of cash by the police provide funding for your community grant scheme, subject to the Deputy Chief Constable and I looking again at the proportion that goes into the community grant scheme that we discussed at the last Planning and Efficiency Group. There's been other internal changes to the scheme to make that sort of a fairer, improved application process and easier to administer. So those are really the only decisions I wanted to highlight this time. Commissioner, unless there's any questions.
Comments or questions? No. Okay. On to 16, the work programme.
Well, we've caught up now in terms of combining agenda items to catch up from the cancellation of the September Public Accountability Board, Commissioner. So we're back on track next time. December will be the Barnsley District focus for the performance and treating people fairly as the focus there. And we'll have more of an update on strategic planning, no doubt, because we'll be further forward in relation to the areas that I've just described.
Okay. So assurance panel reporting 17, the IEP Independent Ethics Panel Assurance Report. Mike, you're here. Pages 95 to 96. Do you put some bullet points down? Do you want to say a little about it?
Just very briefly, this arose from the child queue incident in London and a great deal of adverse reporting suggesting that this was a practice that was maybe rather more widespread. We asked SYP for information about the current position in South Yorkshire covering the 12 months up to the time that we're asked, and I think the significant point is at point 8 that we feel that we're in a position to offer some reassurance to yourself that the use of the power, strip search in relation to juveniles, is used very sparingly in South Yorkshire, and there was no indication that it was either unnecessary or unlawful or in any sense disproportionate. We're pursuing some further inquiries and further detail, but that's our preliminary finding, and the response of SYP was prompt, and we've been pleased to accept the suggestion from SYP that the ethics panel will be notified on a half-yearly basis of the use of that particular power in relation to juveniles. So, in a sense, our concern was to be ahead of any potential questions that might be asked where we would be scrabbling around in response. So we've actually done that, and I'm unaware of any particular issues that have been raised or questions asked, but that's where we are.
And there are only 4 instances in the period that you looked at, so that's...
There are 2 categories. Essentially, there's the use of strip search in custody, and there is where juveniles are in custody, and there is other circumstances, for example in relation to a car stop of somebody suspected of being involved in organised crime. So there were 4 initially notified, and then there are some additional circumstances in custody which we are continuing to explore. Custody operates a slightly different regime, if you like, to regular stop and search in the street. So there is some further work to be done.
And are they all logged? Yeah. So we wouldn't know. Yeah.
Well, that's where we're exploring, and there is the issue of the presence of an appropriate adult, given that these are juveniles, and the particular but very rare circumstances, for example, where there's imminent threat to life, where that may not be possible.
Okay, right. Thank you very much. That was the IEP Assurance Report 17. Is there any other business? 18. If not, thank you very much for your attendance, and we've done it within the hour and a half, which is good news. So thank you very much.